So glad that we're recording tonight so that anyone who is not able to join us live on tonight's webinar call will be able to hear this webinar at their leisure, rather. So we're excited about we're getting ready to do this evening. It is our first time as Mocha Moms of New Jersey working with a school like the independent school, Wardlaw Hartridge. And tonight we have some panelists who are going to be discussing important things for us as parents to know about. You know, as far as their health and their wellness, our children's education is a priority. And so understanding the best ways to help guide them through the educational process during their educational career is really going to be important for us. So with that said, tonight, among our panelists are Sylvia Davis, who is the head of the lower school of Wardlaw Hartridge. Sylvia Davis earned her bachelor's degree at the Stockton College of New Jersey, which is now Stockton University. Her Master's of Science is in elementary education. She earned that from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. And her Master's of Science in Teaching, Learning Curriculum was earned at Drexel University, also in Philadelphia. Ms. Davis spent 12 years teaching the lower school at the Episcopal Academy in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. She was also a professional development who trained and traveled across the country training coaches and teachers. Along with her, another panelist that we have is Dr. Crafton. She is head of the middle school, her middle school humanities department chair, and she teaches the middle school as well. So Dr. Karina Crafton holds a doctorate in educational leadership from the University of New England, and a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from Penn State University, which is my husband's alma mater. So it'll be good to hear from you this evening, Dr. Crafton. She has her bachelor's degree in English from Rutgers University. Dr. Crafton has published numerous scholarly articles, contributed to texts for pre-service English teachers, and presented at national conferences on topics like building global mindsets in adolescent students. This evening, those two panelists are going to be, the conversation is going to be moderated by another Wardlaw Hartridge personnel. So moderating this evening is Dana Matthews. Ms. Matthews is an associate director of administration for the lower and middle schools there. She earned her bachelor's degree at Kansas State University in industrial manufacturing and systems engineering. Interesting. How did you end up in education? We'll talk about that. And she is currently pursuing her Master's of Science in Strategic Management. Dana Matthews, please take it away.
Hi, how's everyone? Thank you all for coming out, and we really, really appreciate the time you're taking in the evening. As Roz mentioned, we're here to talk about an academic approach to building a stronger student. And the focus is just understanding development milestones of children. And as brought out, we have Karina Crafton, Dr. Karina Crafton, head of middle school, and Sylvia Davis, head of lower school. So I'm going to turn the program over to Sylvia. She will be presenting first on the lower school aspects with children. All right, Sylvia, give me 1 second. I'm turning it right over.
Great, thanks so much. So as I'll go back one, but as Roz so nicely, I was impressed about how much you knew about me already. As she so nicely described, I am the head of lower school. This is my first year at Wardlaw Hartridge, and I taught for 13 years at the Episcopal Academy in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, and I've been solely in lower school. And I'd say that the latter part of my career thus far, I've really spent a lot of time doing work on this developmental norms and understanding developmental stages, because I think it's incredibly important to help support your child's learning at home as well as in school. And one of the jokes that I often make with parents is, you've had 1, 2, maybe 3 children. I've had a couple hundred at this point. And so I think, it's helpful to know what are some things that are normal stages to help you better inform your own child's education. So just for a quick little overview, As we said, we're going to talk about different developmental norms for each grade level of child. And then I have some recommended reading that you might like to consider to kind of look further into these developmental norms. And then Karina will do the same. And then the same thing with recommended reading. And then we have a little bit of time, I believe, for question and answer. So most of my work comes from many different places. As Roz mentioned, I did work also as a professional development trainer for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in their Math and Focus Singapore math program. But, I've had the opportunity of being a part of a good deal of professional development. I've traveled actually around the world in some professional development. But I really find that a group called the Northeast Foundation for Children, they have a program called Responsive Classroom, which is really about that social and emotional learning, which is incredibly important. One of my favorite quotes from one of the co-founders of the program, just says that, we have to understand that children don't come to school necessarily with that same set of social and emotional norms or customs that we might all have, that I think when we went to school is a little bit more common. And it's our jobs in schools to kind of level set that basis so we know that they all feel happy and safe. And when I say happy, I don't mean like every minute of every day, but overall, when children feel happy and they feel safe with their teachers to make those risks, that's when that academic learning really takes place. So, I think the few things that are really important to know is all children go through these developmental stages as they grow up. Just as children's height, weight, physical abilities change, so do things such as their desire to play alone or with a group, how they learn best, or how talkative they might be. These pamphlets that I'm showing right now are pamphlets that I have in my lower school, and I know Karina also has in the middle school, because they're really, really helpful to provide to parents so you can see just kind of a guide of what is developmentally common versus something that may not be. Most often when I talk to parents and I provide them with this, they read through and they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And it's funny, Marcella, who's one of our fantastic parents, could probably vouch for that one, where it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. These stages of development and all my work in elementary and early childhood education, they're fairly predictable with children within any given culture, even though there are certainly cultural differences from region to region. In general, we're going to find these same stages of development. These predictable changes come with how children relate to others and how they also approach the world. It's also important to know that these children go through stages at different rates. Although there are general characteristics at each developmental stage in any culture, how quickly a child goes through these stages depends on many, many things, including the child's personality and the environment they're in. So it's common and normal for some children to arrive at a developmental stage a bit later or a bit earlier, sometimes even a year later or earlier than their peers. Children might mature more quickly in one area, such as physical development, but a little bit more slowly in another, such as social development. And then the last thing that's really important to know is that children don't suddenly change on their birthday. So when we say that these ages are important, they're not going to wake up on their 6th birthday and all of a sudden they're there. It's just there's a nice scope to consider of what they'll be coming into as time goes on. I think the most important thing to take away from this, and I know that Karina would agree with me, is that enjoy your child at every single age. Every single age is unique. Every single age is a wonder. And there's so much that can be gained from each of these that it's really important to enjoy them at that time. And then those pamphlets that I just referred to, they're informed by this book. This is a book that you can purchase on Amazon at any point. And as I said, I have some recommended reading in the end. I'm a big reader myself. I believe reading is an incredible way to inform these types of decisions. And this is one that we use as educators in my lower school. We all have this, but as well, you can order it. And I have friends, family members, former parents who have recommended it. They've purchased it and they said, thank you so much. That was so helpful to help me understand just a little bit more about why my child is going through these stages at that same time. So, I'm going to start with, I'm in charge of the lower school, so I'm pre-K 3 through 5th grade. I think Karina's a saint for working with middle schoolers, but that's what everybody says about me, about the little ones. So, I think that, teachers certainly find their niche and that's a space to be. But, pre-K 3 and JK 4, we have a pre-kindergarten program of 3-year-olds and a junior kindergarten program of 4-year-olds. But, I kind of lump them together for, a few reasons. these grades are the times that it's hard to let go of your baby a little bit. You know, it's your little one's first taste of independence. And it can be a little bittersweet, but you know, you'll be amazed at all the things that they do. These children at this age are sponges. That, you know, that saying is not really even trite. It is incredibly true. They will charm you with detailed descriptions of things like the life cycle of a butterfly. They seem to have incredibly specific knowledge about whatever they might be learning. You know, they're encouraged to fix problems. So you might find yourself at this age feeling a little less bit like their butler, you know, where they spill it and they can clean it up, and they can start to clean it up. You know, they'll likely start to hear that famous, "I can do it." You know, the tone might be different depending on the day, whether it's a happy "I can do it" or a little bit of an attitudinal one, but they really want to be more independent. They have an internal urge for this. You know, pre-Kers and JKers learn a lot of pre-skills, and this is laying that groundwork for the future. Through playing, singing, learning, these preschoolers gain skills that ultimately help them learn to read, write, build their math and science skills, and become successful students. So, you know, also called preschoolers, that they learn these school readiness skills. And this helps them understand routines of school, how to work in groups, how to be students. And though it may seem like it to the outside, you know, pre-K and JK are not all fun and games. In fact, they learn through these fun and games. This is their work and their play. And research has shown that the development of early literacy and math skills in early childhood grades is completely associated with future school achievement in both mathematics and literacy. These little ones are incredibly enthusiastic about exploring math and science concepts described, and their positive attitudes greatly contribute to their future success in school. It's rare to have children at that age say that they don't like school after first few days, once they realize that, you know, they can't just hang out at home during the day. And even then, they usually come, all of my little ones, they come in happy, skipping and running down the sidewalk. You know, in addition, as preschoolers, they move through their classrooms and they manipulate toys, puzzles, and shapes. They are developing these incredibly important cognitive skills at this time. You know, kindergartners, and I began my career teaching kindergarten first, you know, they're a real joy. Even the most sophisticated, worldly wise kindergartner has a very unique innocence, incredibly devoted to learning. You know, this is the grade that bridges students' preschool educations with their future elementary school learning. There's still plenty of playing, singing, craft making in kindergarten, but it's often balanced with more rigorous writing, reading, and math lessons. Kindergartners, you know, they continue to learn and they get used to routines of school, how to work in groups, how to be successful students. But it's an exciting time of exploration for your child. As their motor coordination increases, so will their sense of independence, self-reliance, self-confidence. You know, as this year progresses, they'll be expected to complete assignments with less outside help, accept more responsibilities, follow rules a little bit more closely. You know, they take in so much, and you'll see as we start to go through this that child development is a little bit of like ebbs and flows, in the sense of these times where children will start to explore and learn more about their lives and their environments outside of them, as I described in that pre-K, JK. And then after children spend about a year or so taking in so much information about the world outside of them, they then have these years like kindergarten where they rely greatly on safety. They rely greatly on rules. You'll find kindergartners are these times where all of a sudden your 5 and 6 year old is telling you about the rules. They're telling you to be quiet and not talk during something. They're telling you when to do this. And why did you actually cross the street even though the hand's up? It's because they've taken in so much about the world around them, and now they need to make a little bit of sense of it. As humans, we like to organize things, and kindergarten and kind of those even years are the times when children try to start to make sense. And those are the years you'll see them be sticklers for rules. First graders, and this is one of these other years where they're again taking in so much more. In first grade, children are interested in everything. They love school. They love their teachers. They're incredibly excited about learning. They're eager to please. You know, for them, school is such a good time. But all this enthusiasm can make a first grade classroom quite a noisy place. You know, 5 and 6 year olds cannot wait to share what they know. They have no internal monologue. They answer before they're being called on. And it happens a lot. And they're not being rude. They just really haven't learned the rules of this next level of education. They just want to share their excitement with everyone. You know, developing self-control takes practice. Teachers spend a lot of time in first grade going over conduct for school. And it's not so much about making them toe lines. It's more that, they're again learning how to operate inside a community. Gentle and frequent reminders about hand raising and taking their turn helps keep that good behavior in mind. Teachers really like to call attention to jobs well done. For example, you might hear, like, I like the way Sarah put her hand up when she had a question. Great job, Sarah. Another thing that I think is incredibly important, and this is some work that I've also gotten from Responsive Classroom, is also really putting a lot of the onus on them of being prideful of themselves, saying, you should be really proud of yourself. Just today, I had a first grade student in our spring concert who, despite her friends around her, she wasn't talking during transitions. And I said, Sophia, you should be so proud of yourself. And she said, I am. This is a space where they're trying to make sense, again, of the world around them. And so they need that reinforcement. But the space we really want the reinforcement to come from is intrinsically. So really being mindful of certainly balancing with I'm so proud of you, but a lot more of them being proud of themselves, because that's how they equate hard work and pride in that product. Teachers will sometimes reward good conduct with tickets or things like small prizes and extrinsic motivation, but these are the years that we really want to start to build in a lot more intrinsic motivation. Elementary school traditionally begins in first grade, but in spirit, those first graders are kindergartners in the beginning of the year. A lot happens over the course of a year to transform these little children into young boys and girls. You'll see that your kindergartner comes into first grade as a little kindergartner, but they leave as like a little kid. And they look a little bit more mature. You see a lot of big difference in their faces. They start to thin out a little bit. They get taller really quickly. First graders don't seem quite as wild as kindergartners. The joke that kindergarten teachers often have is it's like herding little kittens. And as they get through first grade, they really start to develop more physically, neurologically, psychologically. They gain more control over their bodies physically. They don't trip as much. Kindergartners trip all the time. At the fine motor level, you often see first grade art is a really, really great representation, a leap over kindergarten art. Large muscle skills are a lot better. As I said, they don't trip as much. They don't bump into one another as much. They have a better sense of self by the end of first grade than they did a year ago. And there's a less of a need to be a little bit more impulsive. And they've, again, start to learn so much, and they're going to start to, after first grade, again, settle into this trying to make sense of their experience. Second graders, when you first meet a second grader, it kind of almost seems like you're reading an eHarmony profile. They're like, I have 2 regular brothers, I have 2 stepbrothers, I have a dog, I have 3 fish, I have a hermit crab named Tommy, my mom does this, my dad, they like give you their life story. And as I said, this is one of those years where they're really devoted to facts. You'll be reading them a bedtime story and they'll say, well, don't you remember in chapter 1, Malcolm asked the dog to be his friend in the back of the playground, not the front. Why would you say the front? They're very, very, very tight on rules. They like to say things about, well, that's not where my teacher puts that. I have to put my pencil in my backpack over here. They go in the pencil bag first. It's not that they're that committed to the rules, but it's really helping them retain what they're learning. It's helping them put learning structures to use and how to follow directions. Second graders care a good deal about following directions. Nothing will rock a second grader more than a substitute teacher, because the substitute teacher is just going to do everything wrong in their mind, and they can't help but really want to go with the way it's, quote, supposed to be. They really value end products. They often do thoughtful, careful work in second grade. They love order. They love facts. But that safety can also lead them to be perfectionistic, and they're very quick to be risk averse. Your second grader you'll see a child who used to be willing to take risks. And I mean, even like eating a different kind of pizza for dinner, and suddenly they don't anymore. They need help from adults at this point to balance that desire for order and perfection with an appreciation for surprises and mistakes. This is a space where you want to start to push your child a little bit to lean into mistakes. They greatly benefit in these years from adults making mistakes around them and laughing them off and saying, that they're not that big of a deal, that, we're going to be okay, because they need us to understand and empathize with their craving for order, but really gently push them to see the joy in random events, surprises, and changes. At times at this grade, chatting with classmates could become a distraction, but there's also a plus to this new verbosity. It helps children who develop that developmentally inappropriate behavior when they realize their peers don't talk or act that way. One of the challenging parts in second grade is that we do have another one of these big developmental shifts, but second graders are very quick to notice if someone is doing something that is not in their minds okay, if they're using inappropriate language, if they're just not quite following the rules. They're very quick to do what my husband will joke and call interplatoon discipline. They'll say, that's not the way we do this. And so that's one of those benefits, again, to having that need for structure. But again, it's going to call for a new level of perseverance. We really want to instill grit that your child will need a little bit. In second grade, when they're working on homework and things like, or even creating things, it's best to help them struggle a little bit when they try something new, because that will help them develop that the mistake might happen and it's going to be okay. And sometimes they'll be quick to quit, because in their minds, if it's not going to be done perfectly, they're not interested in doing it at all. Also in second grade, they're adjusting to more rigorous learning environments. They are able to deepen and expand their skills and knowledge. They become more experienced writers, readers, mathematicians. I mean, even from the way I'm describing, you can see that there's a good deal more that happens in second grade. And so the root of their need for structure is because they're having a lot of external feedback being delivered to them, and they have to process it. I've done a lot of reading about child development and these shifts, and they liken it to adults learning a new language in a week. That for children of this age, as they go through these things, you'll often find, as with 2- and 3-year-olds, second graders will also often be very quick to cry. And that's most likely due to the fact that they just can't retrieve the language they need to express themselves to. And so one of the best things you can do is let it burn out like a tire fire. You just have to let it burn out, and then when they're calm, try to be able to speak to them again, because there's just so much information being delivered to them about the world around them, and it's challenging for them to process sometimes. Third graders are similar as first graders in the sense where they're incredibly easygoing. They love a lot what they do. Third grade marks a really important time in education because they're transitioning what's often known as the lower grades to the upper grades. It's a really crucial period in students' learning because they become even more independent and mature learners. In third grade, students are progressing from practicing basic skills to mastering them, to moving on to further developing more complex skills. Third graders become more advanced readers, writers, mathematicians, thinkers. They dig deeper into topics and they begin to analyze what they learned. So while they're developing those skills in second grade, now we're kind of going into that depth versus breadth. They want to now do more complex systems like analyzing and synthesizing information and inferring. Third graders are known for their positive energy. They're so enthusiastic, they will try anything. Do you want to sing? Okay. You want me to try dance? Okay. It's really impossible to not be swept up by their energy and enthusiasm. This can also be third grade's greatest challenge, because what is buoyed by their increasing skills and blessed with seemingly unquenchable energy is that they're often overambitious. They bite off more than they can chew. Their attention span doesn't always match their enthusiasm level. And so it's really a big, long case of their eyes are bigger than their stomach. You'll often find third graders frustrated because they took out a big project that they aren't able to finish, or they waited until the night before a big project was due in school, and that's when you'll see the rare but pretty deep low lows where they just feel so overwhelmed with all that's going on. You might also see this socially with their friendships, because they'll have this perfect friendship and then one day they don't, and you find yourself confused about what happened. But it's most often because it's this biting off more than they can chew mentality that's hard for them to process. Fourth graders they're so alive. The bulk of my career, I taught fourth grade. Fourth grade is really, really, truly fantastic. The spirit and their energy of fourth graders is truly infectious. They're in this really magical time when they aren't really little kids anymore, but they've not quite fully hit adolescence yet either, which, I know Karina will disagree with. I greatly enjoy. They're primed for learning. They crave really positive adult attention. You can really get fourth graders to dig into something. They still really greatly want to do what's right. They become so immersed in their learning and they're passionate about their work. And this all happens when they have that safe, comfortable atmosphere. They're starting to become much more of actual people. And so you get to learn a lot about their personalities, their likes, their dislikes. I remember one year when I was teaching fourth grade, I had a March Madness bet with two of my fourth graders because I'm a big UNC fan and they were big Duke fans. And I told them I would throw them a party if Duke went further. And they did that year. But that was I remember it was such an impactful moment. One of the parents told me my son said the best day of his life was the day that he made a bet with his fourth grade teacher about March Madness, because they start to have these developed personalities and they really like to dig into that. In fourth grade, for many students, school can get tough for the first time, especially if they're one of those students who are intuitively just kind of good at school, good readers, good writers, good mathematicians. But the complexity of fourth grade is where it can suddenly get tough for them. Gone is that gentle focus of the younger grade teachers on those basic skills and social development. And now there are some hard subjects to grapple with. There's more schoolwork, there's more homework to organize, there's some real tests to study for. And the saying in education is, in fourth grade, children stop learning to read and start reading to learn. They're still learning how to read, but in a different way. What's more, fourth graders need to navigate an increasingly complex social environment that can often happen overnight. We don't like to believe it as the adults in their lives, but the hormones are starting. And so, they have a difficult time sometimes. I remember I had a fourth grade girl who sat down with me and said, "Mrs. Davis, do you ever feel like you want to cry sometimes for no reason?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. Did you tell your mom that?" Because it happens very quickly. And again, they don't know how to make sense of it. They have a very new sensitivity to this complex social environment. Suddenly they've defined someone as a smart one or a popular one. And in some spaces you just think, well, I mean, who's to say what's popular? But they start to define this themselves. Again, this is one of those even years where they're trying to organize all the information they've learned about life in the last year. Fourth graders are not quite ready to distance themselves from their parents as children begin to do a year or two down the road. It's often fourth to fifth grade, your child is fine with being seen with you in public, and then one day they're not. For some, it can be that last little innocent year, but it's a really complex, incredibly exciting year of maturing from a littleish one to beginning that adolescence. And then fifth graders, which is the final year that they're with me in the lower school. It's often that last year of elementary school. Fifth grade is an important time for students to cement all these skills they've gained throughout the upper grades and develop them even further in preparation for middle school. One of the biggest misconceptions is that fifth graders are slightly bigger fourth graders, and they're not. There's just so much more. They're almost all extroverts. Again, we have this other situation where there's no internal monologue. They really need to talk to think all the time. And the truly skilled fifth grade teachers don't spend a bunch of time trying to shh. They teach them how to speak productively, how to channel these spaces. Fifth graders build on what they learned in fourth grade by thinking and analyzing in deeper ways about what they learn and what they've read. They also begin to write structured, clear, detailed pieces. Fifth graders are encouraged and expected to be more independent in their learning, which, can be tough for some of them. And sometimes it's just tough for their parents, but that's okay. That's what that year is for. They require less guidance and support from adults and teachers. And so, for example, when a student's asked to research a topic, he or she should be able to know what to do and how to accomplish that goal when you're in a classroom with those really incredibly skilled teachers. They may not be able to retrieve it right away, but they should be able to do it. They might need assistance from teachers throughout this research, but they also have those basic tools to do so by themselves. And one of the biggest pieces that I always say with fourth and fifth graders especially is it's not so much about knowing it all, but it's more about being able to advocate for themselves. I always would say to a child, I would much prefer you come into me with half completed homework and say, I know what I did here, I had trouble with this, versus completed homework that your parents helped you with because I don't know what you had trouble with, or nothing at all. They can begin to self-advocate. And then the only challenging piece is that hormones can wreak havoc. They have a growing interest in what everyone else is wearing, doing, texting. That part makes me nauseous. I can't help it. And so all this preoccupation with everyone else can sometimes make this grade a bit of a rough ride. But, I think that overall, when channeled in the right way, I think this is an incredible incredibly great year for them. It's this year where they're synthesizing everything and they see themselves as leaders. Our fifth graders in our school have a great deal of a leadership role with the younger children. They have buddies with kindergartners because we want them to channel this type of energy. It's also, again, one of those important years for them to really see that we don't have to be perfect, that we're going to make mistakes and it's going to be okay. Because they begin in fifth grade to put some real pressure on themselves as to they have to, in their minds, get it together for middle school. So, here's some of the things that I've recommended to parents. Anyone who's been in my office knows I probably have 150, that's not hyperbole, books in my office. I have a couple hundred or so at home, and I still have some in storage at my in-laws' house down in South Jersey. But, again, I really love to read. I find it to be incredibly important. It's a great conversation piece. It also can sometimes allow you to know what questions to ask. Sometimes we don't even know which ones to ask. I spent a great deal of my career studying this work. I joke that I'm one of the few people who just kept going to school and never stopped, really. But I guess, everyone in education really is. But, I spent a great deal of my second master's on teaching and learning. And, reading about these things, asking questions is incredibly important. So all of these books, and I'll just give you a quick little moment and then I'll pass it off to Karina. The Self-Driven Child is a newer book, and it's about kind of giving children that ability to have some control, and not carte blanche control, but more like the children of these ages, as I said, they're trying to make sense of the world. And so when they have structured control, it allows them to self-advocate, it allows them to develop some perseverance and grit. And along that same line, a really great author, Jessica Leahy, wrote the book, The Gift of Failure. Failure is almost a four-letter word to us as adults, but it's incredibly important. Not only will it help them develop that grit and perseverance, it also will help them learn more. I think it was Thomas Edison that said, I haven't failed, I've just found 100,000 ways that don't work yet. That's how they learn more. Another great one is Boundaries with Kids, when to say yes, when to say no, to help your children gain control of their lives. I joke that, parenting and teaching, sometimes it's just a game of stamina. And there's sometimes that you do just give in, and then there's sometimes that it's really important to not. And it's hard to sometimes know when is which one. Another great one, Wendy Mogul is an incredible child psychologist. And this first one is an older book that she's written. I've read it probably 4 or 5 times. It's really important, with the blessings of a skinned knee. She uses some teachings mostly from old Yiddish proverbs to raise self-reliant children. And then this newest one, Voice Lessons for Parents, what to say, how to say it, and when to listen. And as I said, I'm a big believer in this group with the responsive classroom approach. And one of their books that my faculty have now, and we're doing a book study of this summer, is called The Power of Our Words. And I believe that what we say and how we say it to children is much more impactful than we could ever imagine. And not that we have to be perfect, but I think when you practice, it's just like running a marathon. You just have to keep practicing and be incredibly mindful of what we say and how we say it, because we just don't know how much it matters to them. And as I said, they're spending all these years really making sense of the world around them and taking in information, and they catch a lot more than we could ever possibly imagine. And so I know I have a lot of information that I've thrown at you, but I will say that's pretty much a synopsis of my day, spending my days with pre-K through 5th graders. And then I'm going to pass it over to Karina to kind of move on from there. So I'm going to let go, and then Dana, I think you have to pass it along.
The move to middle school begins and ends with a significant transition. So students arrive in 6th grade as 5th graders primarily. They leave in 8th grade ready, for the most part, to embark on upper school study. Those 3 years go by quite quickly. Their cognitive and physical changes happen quickly but unevenly. We'll talk a bit more shortly about how that is evident, especially between boys and girls, over their experience in middle school. Certainly in the middle years, children need increasing and authentic opportunities for independence, and we cultivate those carefully. Their executive function varies widely, also needs constant cultivating, as I'm sure you know as parents at home, certainly. Challenging, questioning, and indeed some risk-taking are the norm. And we have found that an advisory program is a crucial piece of the support program in the middle school. Things like time management, resilience, collaboration, fostering an ethical mindset, and fostering curiosity happen in and beyond the classroom setting. And we find our advisory program is a really great place for that to happen. So sixth grade year begins with most students still thinking, behaving, learning as an elementary school student would. Certainly by mid-year, they have developed key aspects of cognitive and non-cognitive traits that allow for some more challenging and rigorous individualized curricula. Writing, for example, becomes a process. Research is introduced as a skill. Mathematics moves beyond arithmetic to real-world applications, and a broadened sense of inquiry into the humanities. So sixth graders are primed for building their capacity for abstract thinking, deductive reasoning, and considering issues from multiple perspectives. Girls enter puberty while most boys won't for another year or more. Sense of belonging is crucial for both boys and girls, and it is developmentally normal to be rather self-absorbed. Impulsivity is heightened. So this reminds me, Sylvia, a bit of your talk of first graders, the idea of a filter perhaps not being present. That happens again in sixth grade. So impulsivity is heightened, as are curiosity and academic risk-taking. Sixth graders, as we know, are keen imitators. They watch closely what others are doing, particularly the adults in their lives. So we're always aware of that and cognizant that they are watching. Educational settings that offer a hybrid, so a silo, discipline-specific approach work well. And an example of that would be in the lower school, courses are generally, I'm sorry, I hear some noise in the background. In lower school, courses are generally self-contained. The students in fifth grade will have a couple teachers for their core academic courses. When they move on into sixth grade and middle school, they will have discipline-specific teachers. And certainly that takes a bit of getting used to for sixth graders. The advisory program indeed helps with that. So seventh grade, perhaps the toughest year for some middle schoolers, the middle of the middle. For many, this is indeed the beginning of junior high. It is a constant search for identity. Friends become more important than family, than teachers, than coaches, virtually everyone. And we find that seventh graders are very beholden to routines, rituals, ceremony. These all become very important in their lives. Physical development varies widely. Girls maturing much more quickly. It's not unusual in seventh grade for there to be a foot or more difference in height between most of the girls and most of the boys. Some of the boys won't catch up until ninth or even 10th grade. Seventh graders begin to worry incessantly over what others are thinking, particularly their peers, and they are convinced that their peers are watching them at all times. They're all thinking that, so in fact they're not watching each other, but they all imagine they are being watched by each other. We find in seventh grade the relationships they have with caring adults become more and more important, even though they gravitate toward each other and their peer group for affirmation. They need those trusted adults in their lives ever more in the middle of the middle grades. A quick book recommendation, if I might, while we're on the seventh grade slide, is Unselfie, Why Empathetic Kids Succeed in Our All About Me World. And I have that on my recommended reading slide a bit later on. It's Dr. Michelle Bordva, and it's a wonderful read about the impact that social media and an always-on lifestyle is having on students in middle school. We find that most students who arrive in middle school have had a cell phone for a couple of years already, and a smartphone at that. Most of them are connected to some form of social media, not all, but some, and they're making choices about what to post and how to be a good digital citizen or not. This book is one of many tools to help teachers and parents help students to navigate what can be treacherous waters. In the seventh grade, finally, abstract reasoning becomes a core component to curricula in successful programs for middle schoolers, and designing activities and lessons that really challenge students to delve into areas of interest that form around specific disciplines. And I'll never forget when I first began teaching middle school, I was told by a colleague in a former school that my students were far too young to study Shakespeare, and that it was really just a waste of my time to even try to go down that road with them. And so I didn't listen, and I went down that road with them. And they performed Macbeth beautifully that year and subsequent years. They were absolutely ready for it. In fact, they took it on as a challenge and impressed me. And every year since then, when I have read Shakespeare and performed it with middle school students, I'm impressed. We have our performance coming up this Thursday and Friday. So we're ready. I think we're ready for that. The last year of middle school, the 8th grade year, the last year before high school. The 8th graders are the leaders of the middle school, but they aren't really sure what that means. They crave leadership, they crave independence, but they are still young adolescents, prone to impulsivity, subject to their own poorly developed frontal lobes at this point. They've got nearly a decade remaining of growth in that part of the brain. We cultivate carefully leadership opportunities for 8th graders. And I think it's quite important to do so. They're ready for leadership opportunities. They need them to be highly structured in order to be successful. For example, 8th graders in our school are placed into small business groups and invited to take some seed money given to them by the student council to create small business proposals. And they form business plans, they raise money, they end up tripling or quadrupling the seed money. They then donate that money to a microloan finance operation in the South Pacific that was founded by one of our alums. And through that process, they're learning about philanthropic entrepreneurialism, and it's structured in a way that is most helpful to the 8th grader. So they're leaning in, they're taking that leadership role and learning from it, and hopefully carrying that forward with them as they move into high school. Here's where we really see lots of differences between girls and boys in the 8th grade years. Girls are typically menstruating, nearing the end of puberty. Many boys are just starting that process. While some certainly have begun puberty, many are just starting it. And we see great differences between girls and boys in terms of physical development. However, that belies social emotional immaturity, perhaps, and that can't be gauged by physical appearance, as we know. Both girls and boys desire connection, especially with friends, but they also are developing this need for privacy. And that's a balancing act, certainly for parents, to provide privacy that is appropriate for students, for children at home, and respect that need, but also to be aware of what's going on in their lives. Again, we see social media and the access to technology as a challenge to that at times. Parents want to provide and respect that privacy. At the same time, so much is available on the internet and through devices that we know we can't turn them loose onto the internet. Social learning, indeed, is pivotal at this age. Their cognitive abilities are vastly enriched through the social connection, particularly in-person, real-time social connection. Feedback from teachers, from parents and coaches certainly is desired, but not in front of their peers, even if the feedback is quite positive. In fact, I have had students who have asked me specifically in classes, outside of class rather, not to share that great paper they did, not to highlight that great accomplishment. So even positive feedback needs to be tempered in terms of when it is provided. Not every student is comfortable with very public affirmation at this stage. So structured and authentic opportunities for our 8th graders to demonstrate their leadership is vital to prepare them for that next launch, that move into upper school. And if I might, just one more book recommendation before we move on to upper school is Judy Lithcott-Hames. Perhaps you've heard of her. She was the freshman dean and director of undergraduate student programs at Stanford. She is also on my book recommendation list. And she's written widely on how difficult it can be to know when to pull back and when to allow some autonomy. And this is just a brief quote from her recent book. Parents spend so much time arguing, nudging, cajoling, helping, nagging, praising, sometimes sending our children the message, I don't think you can actually achieve any of this on your own. Thus teaching the child that parents will always need to be there to intervene, infantilizing the young adolescent. It's an interesting take on what we do out of love and caring by sometimes interceding too soon or too often when we really need to be preparing these 8th graders for the next step. And that is the next transition out of middle school, stepping up into the high school years. Certainly young teens begin that high school journey. Young men and women finish it, and it seems to go by very quickly. Great value is placed by teenagers on authenticity and on avoiding failure. Physical maturity still, as it does in the middle school years, can belie social and emotional immaturity. Unhealthy risk-taking peaks at this point, especially among boys. We'll talk a bit more about that shortly. High schools with firmly embedded advisory and peer leadership programs can certainly help teens to navigate what they will experience over the course of this 4-year journey. So we take a look at 9th grade. We watch for two particular things as students begin 9th grade and on through high school: technology addiction and sleep deprivation. And it sounds like that is all bad news, and I'm alarming folks, and I don't mean to alarm at all. I simply mean to advise of trends and observations, and knowing them, having that information can help us to avoid both of those. Technology addiction is certainly a real thing. We see it, addiction to phones, addiction to video games, and we see sleep deprivation brought about in part at times by technology addiction, but also by pressure, which begins to mount in the 9th grade year and continues. So in 9th grade, we first see gaps in skills and knowledge that begin to have significant consequences as we're looking at, for example, a permanent transcript that will go on to college. Just the prospect of that permanent transcript existing presents pressure to a young person. In this climate, especially, where the competition feels incredibly intense, and is in fact, maintaining realism about what really is important in life and whether one test will or will not break your chances to get into Harvard is quite important. And then 9th graders need to hear that message at home and in school and from college counselors and trusted coaches and advisors regularly in order to have a bit more realistic approach to their studies and their high school career. Certainly girls will develop socially and emotionally a bit more quickly than boys in high school. We expect there to be poor choices and allow consequences. We certainly fail our children when we don't allow them to experience failure for themselves. And it's important to recognize the reality that both boys and girls are curious about sex, and some will be active, and that may include your children. Folks never want to think it's their own, but there are some out there, and it could well be yours. Certainly having that open dialogue about sexual health is important. They are naturally concerned with differences between fact and opinion. They crave that authentic adult, and they know when adults are not being truthful with them. They can see right through it. They're constantly exploring their identity. They see themselves in what they read and study. You might notice in a 9th grader, they try on different mannerisms and behaviors, language, slang, clothing, ways of being, and even ways of moving as they pursue a unique identity. Another book recommendation before we move on to 10 that really does help with the 9th grade. I'll echo Sylvia's recommendation, The Gift of Failure by Jessica Leahy. It's an excellent book to revisit, so you might read it when your child is in lower school, but then again, just before high school begins, it'd be great to revisit that text. And so 10th grade. 10th graders really dive into discipline-specific interests, and that's wonderful, and we encourage it. But I do see sometimes the pre-med, pre-law, pre-engineering obsession begin in 10th grade, where we focus too narrowly, too soon, and we rack up as many science APs as we can, or as many humanities APs as we can, and we put all of our eggs into one basket because we know I'm going to be a brain surgeon, and maybe that student will, but at the expense of becoming well-rounded. And so we are very careful and should be very careful to avoid allowing students to become too narrowly focused too soon. 10th graders are especially prone to self-labeling. That can be positive, that can be quite negative. I'm dumb, I'm not capable, or I am capable. I'm an athlete and I can play 3 sports this year. Those labels can become concretized and self-reinforcing. So we need to be cautious about that. 10th graders, as most teenagers experience, can proceed through a stage their parents might call mute. How was your day? Fine. What did you do? Nothing. How was school? Okay. asking them to talk a little bit more is a healthy thing. And certainly I found with my own children, avoiding yes or no questions and asking questions that do seem a bit out of ordinary help to get them to talk a little bit. So what great question did you ask today? May or may not get a great response, but keeping that conversation going by continuing to ask questions and keeping your relationship going through conversation is pretty important to their social and emotional health. Again, social media and social hierarchy, very important to the 15-year-old. They live their lives, many of them, on their devices. We don't see that going away. As alarming as it may be, it does seem to be the way of things for many of our students, and that's across the country and around the globe, that they live a great part of their lives online. Again, curricula and advisory programs and family discussions about digital citizenship and being safe online should never end and should increase, certainly in the high school years. By 10th grade, study skills are generally established, although there will remain some variability in executive functioning and support may be needed. Certainly as coursework becomes more difficult, 10th grade is often the year when students will take their first advanced placement course, or maybe two. It is also a year when honors programs become more and more available and students are challenging themselves. What has worked for them easily, perhaps in the past, may become more difficult. They may find they need to put in much more effort and much more studying at home simply to maintain the grades they had enjoyed up until that point. 10th graders love to debate and argue. This is where they find they can express a reasoned opinion and back it up, and we love to see that. Again, 10th graders will see right through inauthenticity or insincerity in adults. And by the end of 10th grade is when we will see boys physically catching up to girls in terms of maturation. And moving on to 11th grade. Independence and autonomy, crucial to their well-being at this age. In 11th grade, most boys and girls look to be adults, many of them. They will have reached physical maturity. However, there are still variable levels of social and emotional maturity, in fact, wide-ranging at this stage. Boys are still taking risks, unhealthy risks in 11th grade at a higher rate perhaps than girls. There's experimentation certainly with alcohol and with drugs. We find that can happen at earlier ages certainly, but 11th grade is a time when lots of young people are also driving, and that adds a layer of concern. So programs within schools and beyond and discussion at home about safe practices and calling for a ride rather than driving still hold true. College preparation begins in earnest in most schools in 11th grade. The pressure in that process is self-applied by 11th grade. There have been years of hearing the talk about college and pressure coming from peers and coming from family and coming from teachers. Perceptions of unrealistic goals and achievements really come to bear in the 11th grade year. Students begin to worry about that list of colleges and which ones should I apply to and which ones do I really have the chance of getting into. And they worry that they will be the only one who will receive a rejection letter. Everyone receives rejection letters, but it doesn't feel to the 11th grader as if that is the case. Achieving balance is really difficult for most 11th graders. We find that students in the final 2 years of high school really try to do everything. They want to be a part of every club and play a sport every season, take as many challenging and advanced courses as they can, complete community service, and be involved in peer tutoring and many other activities, and we have to help them to achieve balance. As they go into 12th grade, they're a mixture and a bundle of emotions, sort of conflicting emotions. They're very excited about this culminating year of high school, but quite hesitant, and in fact, I'll venture to say a bit scared at what is to come. They've got this idea of college, but the reality is on the horizon, and that's a bit intimidating. They also are negotiating a changing role with the adults in their lives. They look like adults, but they're not. Their teachers and parents are still authority figures in their lives, but they are making many decisions for themselves. They're experiencing that pressure to earn admittance to college. That can be a great distraction for many of them. We see anxiety and depression can set in and worsen when college rejection letters arrive if we don't table set for that eventuality. They will have college acceptances, but they'll also have some college rejection letters, and preparing them for that is incumbent on us. They will seek out their peers as listeners over family members most of the time. In fact, their relationships with the trusted adults in their lives will often become strained, and that is due to anxiety about post-high school plans. Open discussions, of course, are key. We find the richer the relationships we've built over a period of years, the better the outcomes for students. And finally, enjoying these final months before they're off to college. It does seem to happen so very quickly, and in the flurry of end of year everything, it is easy to lose track of that time. Just a caveat on the 12th grade year, variability in development still remains an issue even in the 12th grade year when we're talking about students who are generally 18 years old. Some students are keenly aware of and they're able to plan ahead independently regarding their college prospects. Others need an awful lot of assistance with that. And again, it's the frontal lobe developing at a different rate for different folks. We've seen a trend in recent years across the nation, this bragging about a lack of sleep and a bragging about having so much to do, almost a rite of passage for 12th graders to compete with one another for how exhausted they really are. And they really are exhausted. But I think it's that self-applied pressure, and it's happening sort of as a collective. And so that is something that school counselors and administrators and teachers and advisors are working to help students to navigate. And my last book recommendation really speaks to backwards design here. If we want a successful 12th grader, and we all do, it starts at the earliest preschool stages, certainly. And a great book, again, on my reading list, which will follow, is Julie Lifcott-Haim's recent book, How to Raise an Adult, Break Free of the Over-Parenting Trap and Prepare Your Kid for Success. And she argues against sort of the checklist childhood. So I strongly urge that book and recommend that strongly. And here's my recommended reading list briefly. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Karina and Sylvia, and we really appreciate the time you took to enlighten us on our children's development. I've actually learned a lot, and now I understand some things that are going on in my own household. Roz, I know you wanted to open it up to questions, so I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, ladies. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Crafton. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you so much, Dana Matthews. We appreciate the time that you've taken, and as you've gone through every single stage. This was amazing, and I'm sure that the parents that are listening in were tuned in to their specific grade levels where their children currently are. I can see in the chat room that there are parents who are better informed thanks to you. Thank you so much. One of the things we would like to do is to make that reading list that you have there available. Is it in a PDF form somewhere?
We can definitely get a PDF. I'm sure Karina and I both could probably come up with about 15 more off the top of our heads. This was just to keep it in one slide. You know, it's
Sure thing.
We're both
We certainly do appreciate that. And what we will do for the people who are attending tonight, we will, we have emails and so on. We will make sure that we not only get you a link to the replay of tonight's discussion, we will indeed be sure to attach this PDF so that you'll have that book list. Now, let me take an opportunity to introduce my fellow Mocha leaders who you can see on the screen there. Dana Middleton, and why don't you ladies wave as I talk about you? Dana is the president of our Bergen County chapter. Marcella Addison is the vice president of the Middlesex chapter. Tanisha Russell Day is our regional director, or one of our regional directors, thank you, Tasha Baez, is the president of our newest Mocha Mom chapter in Morris County. Tamika Simmons, could you wave, Tamika? Thank you. Is my co-president in Essex County, and then Judy Callahan is the president of our Somerset Union chapters. Wave, Judy. I think Judy is still frozen. Hopefully she can hear me. Judy, can you hear me? All right. I asked her to reload her page so that she can get back in. We do have some questions. Why don't I start with Bergen County? Dana, do you have a question that you're ready with?
Absolutely. Thank you again, ladies, for this information. It was very helpful, especially the second grade information. I really appreciate that. The question that I'd like to ask is, what expectations should we have for schools with regard to exposure to technology at each grade level to stay competitive?
Well, so how about I start from the lower end, and Karina can take over on the higher end. You know, as Karina said, technology is it's not going anywhere, right? It's not a fad. It's not a trend. It's going to be here, and I think that I read a really great article a few years ago that just talks about technology and likens it to citizenship. That
my thing muted? I can't hear.
Technological second language learners. And our children are growing up as digital natives. You know, we knew a time when we could, when we didn't need it and when it wasn't a part of our lives, and they're not. But as Karina said, you know, it's really important for us to manage that. One of the strategies that I recommend to parents all the time is to start from the get-go in making it a very obvious part of your life, but not the central focus. I recommend that parents themselves, and it's hard for us, you know, put away your devices in a specific place, put them in a drawer. That's where they live. They're not, you know, just as your TV isn't on 24 hours a day, neither should those devices. I think, and then I think monitoring is incredible. Start from the get-go. It's really in making it a very obvious. I think we need to mute part of your life, but not the central focus. Oh. I recommend that parents. Sorry, I have my own feedback there, and I just listened to this TED talk about why we all hate the sound of our own voices, so it's painful for me to listen to right now.
Yeah, we can hear it as well.
It's scientific fact why you don't like the sound of your own voice, so I'm just sitting here cringing in the moment. But you know, it's really important to make sure that you're managing that as a way of your life from day one, and then really being in part, making sure your phone.
Wow, there's a lot of feedback happening.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of feedback there, so.
How about that? Yeah, I think it's one of those tough ones. In my experience with webinars, everyone has to mute unless you're the one talking just for the moment, because it's just it's a cycle of being stuck. Maybe that's a lot better. You know, I just think it's incredibly important to be a big part of it. One of the best resources for technology, and I'll add this to the book list, is Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media is a national group that vets through technology, vets through new trends, and really it's almost like a consumer reports for technology. Common Sense Media is going to be a place where you're going to see professionals who've really dug into the value of them. So that would be the space to go from there. And then Karina, if you have anything else to add, I'll mute.
Absolutely, and I will try to keep it brief because I feel very strongly about this topic. So as students move into the middle school, I mentioned many have social media accounts. Virtually all have technology, personal technology devices. We have procedures in middle and upper school for assuring that the devices do not detract from instruction during the day. So perhaps you've seen or had in your home one of those shoe racks that can hang on your closet door for your shoes. We actually have those in our upper school. Our students come into the classroom and they deposit their cell phones into a slot in the shoe rack. And it sounds kind of silly, but it works very well. The students still can see their phone, and at the end of class, they can run and check it because 45 minutes, who knows what can happen on Snapchat in 45 minutes. But they don't have them during instructional time. Most teens spend 8 to 9 hours outside of school in front of a screen of some sort. And that statistic is a bit painful to hear. Think about the length of their day, their waking hours. 8 to 9 of those hours in front of a screen. So they're checking their media accounts, watching a video before school and then after school for hours. Again, this is an average, this is not everyone, but it's enough that it causes some concern. So we know that they are absolutely adept and capable at managing and figuring out technology. They've got that. In fact, when technology doesn't work for me, one of my 8th graders will usually fix it in about 30 seconds. So I call tech support, which is basically an 8th grader coming to the rescue. Tanisha, is your son in 8th grade? I can see him. Hi there. Are you a middle schooler?
Oh, she's talking to you now. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking.
I'm talking about middle schooler.
Yeah, I'm in middle school.
What grade are you in?
You are. I thought so. Well, good to see you. So we find helping students to help themselves manage their relationship with technology is more helpful than banning technology. They're going to be needing to making these decisions in the future. There will not always be an adult to monitor and tell them to put that device away. In fact, we all know adults who are addicted to their technology. We probably work with some of them every day. But we don't need to encourage more FaceTime. And I really believe that strongly. We have an iPad program in the middle school. It is not a device that we use in every class every day. There's just no need for it. These students have iPads and TVs and phones at home. We use the technology when it is pedagogically appropriate, when it expands a lesson in a direction we'd like to go, and that's not every time.
Okay.
I could say more.
Thank you, ladies.
I'll stop here.
We both could talk about that for hours.
Marcella.
We both feel very strongly.
Yes, that is clear. You know, I think as parents, we do as well. So it's good to hear your perspective. Marcella Addison, Vice President of our Middlesex chapter, you have a question. And ladies, because the hour is starting to get late and we'd like to be able to field some questions from the attendees, let's just kind of keep it concise and simple, both questions and the answers, just in terms of our time. Go ahead, Marcella.
Okay, if need be, I can keep my question to one. Again, like everyone, thank you, ladies. I'll send emails tomorrow to thank you further. How can parents best address topics like implicit bias with teachers who may not understand our concerns for raising brown children?
I hope you don't mind, Karina. I'll be happy to start. I was, when I worked at Episcopal Academy, I was also the diversity coordinator for a lower school. I spent about 7 or 8 years attending what's called the People of Color Conference through National Association of Independent Schools for teachers of color. And then there's the Student Diversity Leadership Conference, which is for upper school students to allow them that same space. You know, I think that the most important thing is to begin with relationship building. You know, I think that I don't know a ton of teachers who get into it for their big fat paychecks. So mostly it's all for their care of students. So in most spaces, I would say that there's a lot of just relationship building and empathizing and understanding. And the fortunate spaces, I know that Karina and I care a great deal about that social and emotional. And I think having conversations is always the great first starting point.
Okay. I would absolutely agree, and just add quickly that the education is really a two-way street. And I think parents have a lot that they can help teachers to learn. And teachers have room to grow. So I think inviting those conversations to happen and seeking out the adults in the community who can help foster those conversations and broker those conversations for folks.
Awesome. Do I have enough time for my second question, Roz, or no? I don't want to take up time.
No, you know what? Why don't, if we have time, I will circle back. But,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tasha Bias, ready with a question, dear? Do you have a question? Tasha, I can't hear you if you are speaking.
Hi, ladies.
Can you hear me now? Tasha?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the questions submitted was, without being overly concerned about getting results and children's happiness, what is the best approach to the idea of college scholarships for grade schoolers And should we encourage our young children in elementary school to start completing scholarships or looking for scholarships for age applications for this current age, middle school to elementary school? I'm sorry. Did you understand the question?
Oh, I did. I needed a deep breath before it. That's all. I'd say on the elementary school level, you wouldn't believe how many lower school students will talk to me about what college they're going to. I think it's incredibly important for children to live in their present. I think that we absolutely know that it's a competitive life out there, but we also know that we almost have no way of predicting what their college life will be like. There's a great deal of conversation in higher ed about making it more affordable. I believe it's New York State schools have just made a big monumental change. And I think that at this moment, for elementary school, it's important for them to focus on being their best selves right now. You wouldn't believe how pressured a fourth grader can be about where they're going to go to college. I think about how much has changed in the last year of my life. I couldn't imagine trying to calculate what's going to happen to me in another 10 to 12. So I'd say for elementary school students, they need to focus on their best selves right now.
Okay. Rosalind Cox, are you still on the line? Can you hear me, Rosalind? No? Okay.
Yes, Roz, I'm here.
Hi, you're there. Hi, Rosalind. Do you have a question for us? Rosalind is also with our Middlesex chapter of Mocha Moms. She is choosing not to be on the webcam today, but that's fine. We can still hear her. What's your question, dear?
Good evening, ladies. I am going to defer my question to Marcella. She has all of the questions on behalf of the Middlesex chapter.
Okay. And did Marcella disappear? Oh, there you are, Marcella. You have a second question? Rosalind is deferring to you.
I do. I want to make sure that I allow for everyone else. Has everyone else been satisfied?
All right. Thanks, Marcella. Also joining us is Judy Callahan. I tried to introduce her before, but we were having some technical difficulties, and she is back. Judy is the president of our Somerset Union chapters of Mocha Moms. Judy, what's your question, dear?
I am muting my.
And then she froze again.
Incredible.
No, I hear you now, Judy. Go ahead, try it again.
Okay, how about now? How's that?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. Wonderful information. As a parent, my question is, as a parent, what is the best suggestion to present on the increasing on teaching? I'm babbling. As a parent, what is the best way to present the suggestion of an increase in teaching towards my child, our children's learning style, without the school then feeling the need to refer to special education?
I can jump in here on this one if you don't mind, Sylvia, just with some initial thoughts. So I think a lot of your question speaks to the particular school setting, all right? And so different schools and different school districts will handle that scenario, that situation differently perhaps. I can tell you from my experience what the response may be. And that response would be differentiation that happens in the classroom that would keep that situation from happening in the first place with a highly qualified teacher in the room. For example, we know that, and there's been a lot written about learning styles, and some of that has been debunked in terms of students having one dominant learning style. We know that they learn in all ways, and in different settings, some things come to bear. A kinesthetic learning opportunity might tap into that for some students, whereas a visual learning style might appear in another class setting. But a teacher adept at many styles and creating lessons and assessments and opportunities for students to demonstrate learning in many ways will see in her students their abilities to achieve. And so a highly qualified teacher in the classroom will be able to preempt the need for that sort of intervention, if that makes sense. I'm not suggesting there are not places for a learning specialist to be involved. Indeed, there are. But as it speaks to learning styles, I would hope that in a successful classroom, the teacher in that classroom is using many different assessment styles, many different teaching styles, and tapping into students' various abilities and the ways they learn.
Thank you. Great.
All right, thank you. All right, Tamika,
Yes.
co-president of the Essex County chapter. You have a question?
Yes, I do. What more can parents do to support teachers in educating their children?
I would just say that, especially with being Teacher Appreciation Week, a good cup of coffee will help sometimes, but really, it's really more about building that relationship. It isn't, one of the things that I said the most as a teacher to parents is it's difficult to remember, because you have a lot invested in this kid. You're going to keep it. You've had it for a few years now. And it's hard to sometimes forget that we absolutely want what's best for your child as well. And that just sometimes in the experience, not always, but sometimes in the experience, the path may not be aligned. But when you have a deep relationship with a parent, I've had conversations with parents over years where we don't quite see eye to eye, but I work very hard to really dig in and have a relationship, so there's that trust. So when you may not agree necessarily on approach, or there's some sort of weird miscommunication, you really, really feel like, I know that this person has my child's best interest at heart. So I think that while in the best schools, as Karina was saying, our teachers, we're really digging in, so they initiate that conversation and that relationship. But I think to also take some of that bear as well, to make sure that that you both have the same goal.
Okay. We're going to circle back to Marcella. Is Marcella still here? Thanks. Marcella, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. But among the attendees, please, if you have a question, would you be kind enough to put it in the chat? Write your questions in the chat, and we will indeed attempt to get to it as well. We want you to be able to participate and to be able to get something out of it specifically for your situation. So please go ahead and write in the chat, and we will indeed try to get that answered for you. Marcella, I am coming back to you. Please. You have another question?
Before I go, I'm going to ask, but Tanisha, did you ask a question yet?
I had to unmute myself. No, I don't have any questions this evening. A lot of what I was going to ask has been answered, and the Mochas, you all have had amazing questions. So no, I'm good right now, but thank you.
Thank you. Listen, out of all of the questions that were posed within our chapter, I think we had like 7 or 8. So I had to narrow it down to 2. The other question that our chapter would like to know is, are there any conversations to explain lockdown drills and how the children feel during and after? Are you ever questioning whether or not they're safe, or if they feel safe and protected?
We have those conversations all the time with administrative team, our crisis management team, with teachers. That training is ongoing, and I will tell you that training changes. Just take a look at current events and the news. That training of necessity needs to change. And we're responsive to what we hear and what we learn. And when I say what we hear and what we learn, I mean by folks whose profession is to help schools keep students safe. Just a couple weeks ago, I attended with a few other administrators a conference for schools led by state police representatives, catering their best practices for schools in light of the most recent tragic event in Parkland, Florida. Just in the time since that awful shooting, they have learned and adjusted and are changing some of their practices. So that is not a case, in my opinion, where security will ever be a done thing. We will always be revisiting it. and working to ensure we're keeping children as safe as possible. And everyone in the building, in fact, adults and children alike.
And I would just say to add to that, especially with the little ones that I have, is that what we communicate to the oldest children, to the youngest children, is that it is our job to make sure you're safe. And that's all they really need to know.
Okay, thank you. Judy, I'm going to come back to you for another question, dear. Unmute yourself. All right, it looks like Judy may be having technical issues again. Okay, Dana Middleton.
Again.
Ah, Judy's back. Go, Judy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Question? Yes.
If you can hear me, Roz, you can post the question to the group. It's fine.
I could hear you, and now I can't anymore. All right. We'll try to. Judy, can you hear me? Speak again, dear.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Yes. Yes.
Okay, now I can hear you. Ask me
Roz, it's fine. What I'd recommended is that we open it up to the attendees.
Oh, okay. I was looking and okay, here we go. I'm looking at one. What is an appropriate bedtime for middle and high school students?
That's a great question. I'm not asked that question frequently enough. I wish more folks would ask it. So sixth graders arrive in middle school and they really are still fifth graders. Anytime after 9 p.m. is far too late on a weeknight, especially if they're getting up very early. Some are traveling to school. Eighth graders, perhaps a bit later, their complaint will be, oh, I have so much homework, I need to stay up later. If the homework begins at 8 o'clock because the video games took 3 hours, that might not be a valid argument. But I would say between 9:30 and 10 at the latest for an eighth grader during the weeknight. And upper schoolers, not much later. They will beg to differ and suggest they need to stay up late into the evening doing homework. It is true that teenagers' biological clock has them predisposed to staying up later. It is hard for them to fall asleep early. However, the later they're on their devices, the more difficult that becomes. So if they are on their phones until 11:30, it could be tough to fall asleep before 1. So putting the devices away early and reading a book at about 10 o'clock, not bad for a high school student, but on a device until late in the evening is just a recipe for delayed sleep.
All right. And we have another question. Would you recommend summer school for children that are not required to go to summer school? That question from Melvinia.
My short answer is no.
Yeah, I would say no.
Okay. I'm looking for some other questions. What would you recommend? What would your recommendations be for children with learning challenges in a private school setting?
It's also helpful to kind of indicate if you're able to, if you're talking about elementary or middle and upper, but I would say that for elementary, it really all depends. The challenge with private school and the beauty of private school is that we have more intimate environment. We have teachers who, are able to see your children in a different way. We have smaller class size. So sometimes that's really all you need sometimes, but it depends on what the challenges are. If they're some basic ones, like for example, dyslexia or some reading challenges in the beginning, you're going to find that in private schools like ours, we have teachers who are Orton Gillingham certified, which is a method of reading instruction. And so that's something that, we should be able to handle pretty well and work with. But sometimes as the learning challenges get more complex, we don't have the facility or the staffing to do it appropriately. But there are, with that being said, private schools for learning challenges that specialize. Private schools on the whole, in my experience of being in them, care very much about doing what they do well. And we are less likely to say that we can do something that we don't think we can do.
Okay. Let's see. I want to check to see if there are any other questions. I think that question was coming from Jacinta. Jacinta, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to type that into the chat room. We talked about bedtimes for middle and high school. What about for younger children? Any recommendations there?
Much earlier, I would say that there's little ones, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. I would say like 6 o'clock. I'd say, you know, you could very well have dinner for them and then have one for yourself. I'd say as they get to kindergarten and first grade, you can start to add about a half an hour to that. But they as well need time to wind down. They have very full days. And then I'd say as we max out to 5th grade, much later than 8:30, 9 o'clock with them getting in is going to be much too late, because again, they also need time to wind down. They need to be able to calm themselves, and they need a good deal of sleep. And let's be honest, you do too.
Speaking of winding down, question about homework and when is the appropriate time to do it. When children come, and especially if they have aftercare or other activities after school, should there be a wind down period before homework starts? Or should you just get right into homework while you have their energy up and fewer distractions? Any thoughts about that?
Well, it depends on the child. You'll know when it's going well and you'll know when it's not going well. I would say that it's more important to think about successful rules of thumb with time. You know, that the timing is in general about 10 minutes per grade level, not including reading. That's an appropriate amount of time, and think of that on a bell curve. So if it's going much over that, much under that, you know, that's when you need to ask some questions. And then you probably need to talk to the teacher about what they've learned about the way that your child seems to work best in conjunction with, you know, because some children just need to get it across off their list. Others need some time to wind down. So it really all depends on the child.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? Oh, speaking of, here we go. What is a good way to encourage good study skills? We're going to let that be our final question. Speaking of winding down and people getting tired, it is getting late, and I can feel myself starting to slow. So I know that I do want everyone to have their own good night's sleep and to make sure that our children are in the bed. So here's the last question. What are some of the best ways to encourage good study skills and organizational skills for middle school children?
So with middle schoolers, I like to take a backward design approach to this sort of question with my middle schoolers. So I'll ask them what they're studying for. It's a science test. All right, let's make up a science quiz for this science test. And so the student will create a little quiz to get ready for this science test. That is a study skill in itself, creating that little quiz. The student will then take the quiz and grade the quiz. They love to be teachers, by the way. So anytime they can make up an assessment, they're all about it. So designing their own assessment of the material they will be tested on is an exercise in organization and a good study mechanism. And it allows them to build their capacity for anticipating what's coming, what that test might look like. We also encourage students in the middle grades to be their own advocates and to approach teachers and ask for help in advance of an assessment. I need some help reviewing for this science test. Can we meet for 10 minutes after school? The answer is almost always yes, unless there's a pre-arranged appointment of some sort. So taking ownership of the learning and helping students to design their own study skills is part of our obligation, something we do in our advisory program and in our classes in the middle grades.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Roz, I just wanted to intervene just 1 second. I did want to know.
Please take your time. It's fine.
I did want to bring up, we do have an event coming up called Project-Based Learning, and it's presented by Sylvia Davis. It's going to be this Saturday, and it starts at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Wardlaw Hartridge, and we'd love to have you come out. And again, it goes into really good details on education and the best way to approach academia for lower school students. So it might be something of interest for you, the organization.
Sounds good. Dana, I did actually see the ad for that on your website. Would you be kind enough to give out your school's website?
Sure. It's whschool.org. And Roz, I can include it also. I'll send you the books and also the link of the website and everything for you.
Wonderful. So everyone that's listening in, we will have that information sent to your email. Wardlaw Hartridge is an amazing school. We did ask them, and they were very kind in not making this a commercial about their school, but about educating parents who have children in independent schools, private schools, public schools. And so hopefully we have accomplished our goal in reaching out to you and empowering you as parents to make very good decisions for your children. And what came out of this that I didn't anticipate was not only help in making good decisions, it was understanding my child better, my child better at each of his levels. So ladies, I cannot thank you enough for the information that you've provided for us this evening. They are on a 36-acre campus down in Edison. I've encouraged parents to go and make a phone call, see if you can get a tour of their school, see what it is that they're offering there. And to be active in your child's school, no matter where your child goes to school. And just a little commercial for New Jersey Mocha Moms, or Mocha Moms in general. Mocha Moms is a national organization that supports mothers of color. We are in 21 states. There are 5 chapters here in New Jersey. I think I've mentioned those already. Bergen, Morris, Somerset Union is one chapter, Middlesex, and Essex. If I have not named a chapter in your specific county, doesn't matter. At Essex County, we will gladly accept you if you are from Hudson or Passaic, and so will Bergen County, and so on. If you're in South Jersey, we are working on getting some chapters there. We are a support group for moms. However, we do things like moms only events. We have events for families. We also honor marriages as well. So we do things for couples. Our website, our national website, is www.mochamoms.org. Please take a look there and join us if you want some support. Motherhood is challenging. It's beautiful, but it's challenging. And it's wonderful to have a sisterhood of women with you that understand your challenge. Ladies, good night. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar. Attendees, thank you for coming. You'll receive the replay and any other information that we have for you. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night.